So you're in historical dress, right?
That's right.
Like
Yes.
Victorian dress, like Little House on the Prairie kind of stuff?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever thought about doing a mashup? Like Laura Ingalls and Aliens? Like you could have the thing bursting out of the chest, like from the bodice, and like blah, blah.
No.
Welcome back to episode 2 of Alan Interviews Emily. Alan, the husband, interviews his wife, Emily, about things that she's interested in.
Yes, thank you very much.
So episode 2, we actually started with episode 0. That was Farinelli,
Yes.
and that was about castrati.
Yes.
And episode 1 was about baking.
Right. Yes. Another great love.
And today we thought we'd talk about one of your great passions, which is history, and your involvement with history, and your volunteer work, and also your actual work. You get paid to do this as a museum docent.
Yes, that's right.
I believe you are also doing some work for the county of Delaware here in New York.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, I have been helping with the annual Living History Cemetery Tour.
And that's hosted by the Delaware Historical Society, or
That's the umbrella kind of society for the whole county.
Okay.
But this is for the Town of Middletown Historical Society.
And the town of Middletown, I think it's important to note that the town is a distribution of villages as opposed to like this urban center, right?
Right.
It's very rural there. The work that you did is in a place called
In Margaretville.
Margaretville.
Yes.
Right.
And Margaretville is where the Historical Society is situated, and for the town of Middletown. And they are the ones that script and prepare this tour every year.
I see.
We attended one of them together a few
Yep.
years ago. We loved it. It's very well orchestrated and conducted. And I offered to be a part of it, and luckily they took me up on it, and I was an at-large player, so I was a person in the background that did not have any lines, but I was in full costume, and I portrayed a real person that's in that cemetery. I see what I do as a kind of mix between docent and historical interpreter, but I do more of an interpretation of the place and situation that I'm in. So, for instance, the museum that I work at here in Queens, in Flushing, is the Bowne House.
The Bowne House.
And yes, it's in Flushing. It's been there since 1661. And a lot of history has taken place there that has to do with New York City and actually our country. But when I'm there talking to the visitors that come in, I very much feel my space that I'm in. And that's what I'm sharing with the visitors.
I think it's important. You work at 2 places, actually, but the one that you primarily work at, the Bowne House here in Queens, New York, I think it's important to talk about what kind of museum it is, because I think that affects the docentness of what you're doing, for lack of a better word. So tell us just a little bit about the Bowne House. It's not a traditional museum.
No, it's a small house museum, and it was a place where people lived, actually, 9 generations worth of family, up until 1945. So, I mean, this was a very real, living, breathing space, and that's what we try to share with the visitors, talk to them about it. Now, this is opposed to the old Bethpage Village Restoration, where I have done and still do volunteer work. And that is also historical interpretation, but that is actually a set of homes, shops that create a village. They're all real historical places, but most of them were moved to that site. So it's kind of different. You have students coming in, and you do tell them about the history of the building that you're in, but it's very brief, and they come in and they come out. And it's a little bit different. It's a little bit, I guess, it's a faster kind of abridged version.
Well, because they're fundamentally different places.
And they're,
The Bowne House is a house where people actually lived here in Queens. So when you go to work there, you're just going to a house in a very urban setting, right? However, it's a house that's hundreds of years old, so it's unique in that regard. But old Bethpage restoration, is a working farm on Long Island.
Right. And
so it's about an hour or so from here?
It's about, yes, in heavy traffic it's an hour, but about, in good traffic you get a half an hour, 45 minutes.
And it's a series of houses and buildings that have been assembled there from other places.
Right. Exactly.
And some of them are hundreds of years old.
Yes.
But they're distributed across many acres.
Right. And it's supposed to simulate life in the 1800s and give you that feeling when you come in, but of a working farm and a village that it's on. So it's a kind of a simulated experience of being alive there in the 1800s. And that's opposed to the Bowne House, where you're really just talking about the history of the family and what happened in that one house.
And the Bowne House, you're just going to that house, right?
Yeah.
At Old Bethpage, there are, I don't know if there's a dozen houses there.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
There's more.
None of them are probably as old as the Bowne House.
No.
Right? I mean, they may get close, but the Bowne House is unique for how old it is.
Right.
But there are houses at Old Bethpage that are hundreds of years old. And when you go there, how do you know which house? Are you assigned a house?
Yes, so it's interesting. Yeah, so also the way the job is set up there, as a volunteer, I would go every morning, or I went once a week. Mm-hmm. But when I arrived there, I would be assigned a house to be the docent in for that day.
You may get assigned a house you've never been to before.
Right. So like every day that I arrived there, I never knew where I was going to be posted for that day. And sometimes it was the same house as the week before, and that was cool because I thought, oh, great, I remember everything that I was reading about that house, and so I just can kind of repeat what I'd been doing the week before. But other times, I had not been in that house before. So they did have instructional sheets with that gave you a lot of the highlights of the history of that specific building. And it would be a good idea to have those sheets on you so you kind of brush up on that history that day. Or, being modern, you could have a photo of it on your smartphone and just look at it. But the other thing was there was a strictness about not bringing the present into the past. And that sounds kind of poetic as I say it, but they didn't want you to be flashing your cell phones, have your wristwatch out in view of the public while you were there during working hours. And, they weren't extremely strict about it, but it was part of the whole set of rules of working there. And that is different as compared to the Bowne House, where actually it's my choice. Out of my own volition, I dress up in period costume. And I have to say, I was very inspired by the wonderful TV show, Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, okay.
The dresses that all the women wore in that show, that was kind of my dream when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. I wanted to wear a dress like Laura Ingalls.
Really?
Yes. That was my that was my goal.
Yeah.
I guess my goal was to time travel, go back in time. And I did realize as a child, the only way I was going to get to dress like that and to kind of live that life, because it looked kind of, it was, I know it was unrealistic now, but it looked kind of nice. It was a very kind of cozy world they built up on that show. But the only way I was ever going to experience anything like that would be either to be in a film or to be on a set or a stage. And I do believe that doing this costume docent work is a version of that.
Right. So that's an important point. So in both Old Bethpage and also in the Bowne House, you are in period dress.
Yes.
Right. And can you describe because you have a couple of costumes.
Yes.
Can you describe them and also tell us kind of what period of history they're meant to be from? And the Bowne House has a 400-year-old history.
Yes.
So you're selecting a slice of history for your apparel. And I'd like for you to talk about why you chose that period.
Right. That's exactly right. So at the Bowne House, I chose a dress from the Victorian era. Mm-hmm. And I chose that because actually in looking at these costuming sites, I found that was the most popular, and they had the most number of costumes for that era. And so it was actually for ease of shopping. Right. I chose that. And I have two costumes that I wear. One is more of a summer outfit, so it gets hot, and There is no air conditioning.
At any of these places.
Right, at any of these places, actually.
Right.
So, if you want to be authentic, that is actually being very authentic. I have a more of a summery costume that has shorter sleeves, a lowered neckline, and then I have a winter costume that is also same era, Victorian, that has a higher neckline, and it's just warmer for me to wear. And those are the two that I switch off with at the Bowne House. At Old Bethpage Village, they supply you with a costume. And you also get 2 costumes, though sometimes people can just take one costume and you can kind of alter it for the season. But you also get a shawl, you get a cap to wear, boots for the muddy days, and also a lovely, gorgeous woolen cloak.
Oh, yes. That cloak. You had to give it back recently.
Yes, I had to return it, yes.
But, it's like you're like Little Red Riding Hood, but it was green, though.
Yes, it was green. It was Little Green Riding Hood, and it had a very nice hood on it, and you really feel lost and enveloped in warmth in that.
Yes.
And it really does the job.
Old Bethpage Village, they're giving you the costumes.
Yes.
You're wearing, what they've provided to you. At the Bowne House, you've purchased your own costume, or you inspired it all, because you got the costumes from Old Bethpage first, I believe.
Right.
Did that influence you in terms of your just purchasing of the costume you would wear at the Bowne House?
Yes, it absolutely did. I actually got the name of the company where these costumes are made from Old Bethpage. One of my costumes had the label on it, and that's actually how I knew where to go on the internet. There are other companies that I did look around at, but I really liked my costume at Old Bethpage. So that inspired me. But you can choose. There's also options, and I did choose what color I wanted in my costumes and the size, of course. So it was tailor-made for me, and I really like that. So,
and the Bowne House, they didn't ask you.
No.
That's not a requirement.
No, it's not a requirement. I actually asked them if I would be allowed to wear the costume, and they were overjoyed because also, as it turns out, in learning the history of the Bowne House, some of the last inhabitants would voluntarily themselves wear older period clothing and sit outside on the porch in the hopes of drawing people in so they could give tours of the house that they were living in.
Now, has that happened to you where you've been in period dress at the Bowne House? Someone has seen you from the street and said, what is this all about?
I'm glad you brought that up. Many times that has happened. I've
Many
seen people
times.
just walking by outside. We have front gates, and I see them do a double take, and they look because they're just going about their business. They don't expect to see somebody in this dress with hoops and crinoline to be standing there in the front yard.
Yeah.
And they do a double take, and I've seen people come over to the gate and watch and take out their cell phones to take photos.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You're the only one that's dressing up in period garb at the Bowne House, because there are other educators, I believe, that just they're no less committed than you are, but they're doing it in street clothes.
Right. Yes. Yeah. They don't. There's no need for them to dress up.
Right.
They can still impart the history.
Yep.
And so they choose not to, and that's fine. But that's my choice to do it, and I feel it adds a little something to the sharing of the history of the house.
Yes. Well, I wanted to ask, when you are preparing to give tours, and this is especially true of Old Bethpage, where you may be assigned to a house that you've never been to before, and you said they give you a little cheat sheet, kind of, but how do you prepare to be a docent? How do you prepare to give these tours? And part of that, of course, is the period dress that you've researched, that you've talked about. But what other things do you do to prepare to give a smooth tour?
Oh, I do find it does help to read the cheat sheet before the tours start, and just to brush up, to have the numbers, the figures, the names in your mind, fresh and ready to go. Just like taking a test at school.
Right.
You would look and everything would be in your mind, ready to repeat. And that's like one of the main things that I do to brush up. But it is also kind of doing a mental kind of workup and getting yourself not into character, but just into that frame of mind. And in the living history community, there are terms for whether you're in costume and you are that person and you're speaking, it's called the first person.
The first person. Okay.
Yes, first person. So you're living, you are wholly committed. So if, someone asks you about airplanes, you'll say, what's an airplane?
I see.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're
like method acting.
Right.
In a way,
Method.
right.
Right. It's
Yeah.
method acting.
Yeah.
And then there's third person interpretation where you're yourself, but you're just dressed in a historical costume and you're talking about history. And yes, you're totally cognizant of what year it is and what time we are currently living in. You're just dressed as a historical
And what's the term for
person. That's third person.
That's third person.
Interpretation.
Okay.
So that's interesting. And then there's also other gradations of your committedness
Yes.
to your historical costume. And I'd read an article about it, and I just looked it up again to get the terminology right. But there are people that are very gung-ho about the details of the costume.
Right.
And they call those people stitch counters.
Stitch counters.
Yes.
I think I can understand why that, but please.
Yes. So they'll be counting the stitches and the embroidery in their costumes to make sure everything is exactly as it should be.
Yes.
True to the historical period.
Yes.
The right amount of buttons, the colors, everything. Stitch counters might be a little bit of a derogatory term, but I've come across it in a lot of articles. But it denotes their committedness to getting the details very accurate.
I'm sure it's a term that's used lovingly in the community.
Yes. Right. Between members.
Yeah.
And then there's the other end of the spectrum, and the phrase is called Farbs.
Farbs.
F-A-R-B.
F-A-R-B. Farb.
Yes, Farb. And that would be far be it from authentic.
Far be it from authentic. Okay.
And actually they don't really know what that stands for, but there's a few theories. That's one of the theories, far be it from authentic. The other one is far be it for me to criticize. Another one is fast and research less buying. I think I got that right. But you get the point, though. It's
right.
just that you're kind of fast and sloppy,
right.
and you're okay if a few details are wrong, but the whole point is just to kind of be in that historical mode.
Yes.
So that's the opposite end of the spectrum from the stitch counters. Then there's the middle, and they call those people mainstream.
Mainstreams. So would that be you?
I think that would be me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they want to be authentic. They want to get it right, but they're not going to go crazy. It's okay if the color's a little bit off.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll have jeans on underneath their dress if it's a cold day.
Yeah.
But they do want to be on the more authentic end of the spectrum, but it's not. So they're in the middle. They are in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. There's a whole lexicon, a terminology.
Yes.
It's a subculture of sorts.
Right.
But I wanted to ask specifically, given that you're in period dress and you have some educators at the Bowne House, and everyone at Old Bethpage, they're all in period dress. Right?
Yes.
It's assigned, right?
Right.
But at the Bowne House, some of the educators are in their street clothes. You're in historical garb. And I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on giving a tour. How do you think the fact that you're in period piece, how does that affect the tour versus if you just went in street clothes?
Yes, I feel it really helps me connect more with the visitors. Sometimes you get school groups in, and the students, maybe they don't want to be there, or they don't really understand why they're there, or they're not so interested in history. And having them see me dressed up as a person from a different century is something that grabs their attention. I look like I'm visiting from a different time.
It's almost like you're time traveling.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm a time traveler, and I'm inviting them into my world for an hour. And I'm trying to talk to them and share with them some of the history of the house and of the people that used to live here. And it's very gratifying when I look in their eyes and I can see a light go on. And that usually goes on after I've been talking for a little bit. And there is that moment where I see this connection happen. And I see they understand what this is about. They understand that these were real people that lived in the past. These were real events that happened in this very spot that they're standing.
Right.
And they see it means something to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening with them included.
Right.
They are part of this. It's not something that's old and dusty. Having someone talk to them that looks like they just stepped out of that period helps guide them towards that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see when this moment happens and they get engaged and they want to be there. And that's a magical moment. And that's one of the huge reasons why I like doing this.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
It's knowing that I have just shared knowledge with someone and helped them understand something about themselves.
Yes.
And I love when that happens. It doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people they don't want to be there. They're thinking about lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. That's okay. I invite them to come back and try it another time. But having them know that this is a place, that history took place, meaningful things happen. It also opens them up to the possibility that meaningful things happen everywhere, actually.
You're just really in your element when you do this. I've been on a couple of your tours. I've talked to your sister and your friends who've also been on these tours, and it's just so clear that you're just happy doing this.
Thank you. Maybe I was born in the wrong century, but
well, you were born in the right century to meet me, and I'm glad
right.
that happened.
That's right. Me too.
but thank you again, and until next time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Yes.
I love you.
I love you too. Bye-bye.